Hey Toolerinos, for those of you who saw my Wellington, Ohio steam engine show video, this was briefly in the video, and it was going by on the road at one point, and I went to a yard sale near where I live, and lo and behold, this tractor was there. It's homemade. It looks great. It looks professionally made, and so I decided I really had to show it off, because I know some of you guys out there really like the Flywheel engines, whether they're throttle governed or hit and miss. And so we're here with the man who created it, and he's going to talk all about it and educate us a little bit.
Well, let's start with the engine. A dear friend of mine who has passed away got me into hit and miss engines. He had been into it for years, knew more about them than anybody I would ever hope to meet. And I was at my first engine show, and I found this engine. It's a 1927 McCormick Deering Model M, 1.5 horsepower. And I actually went and got him to look it over and make sure it was a good one. So this is an engine that I'm never ever going to get rid of. But I wanted something to do with it that was kind of cool other than just sitting there. And I also was interested in building something that I could drive around the shows with my father. So I built this tractor. The engine originally would have been McCormick Deering. It's like a real dark forest green. I made it red to match the tractor. Couple of things I added to it. This brass guard right here is just an extension of the water hopper. It extends into the water hopper some. The reason for that being is when I first built this and drove it, I hit a bump and steaming hot water was all over my lap. I didn't like that, so I put that on there to keep that from splashing out.
Good idea.
So the tractor's been a little bit of an evolution. Different changes have been made. The frame is homemade completely. The steering gear is out of a old lawn tractor. I don't remember what it was, but it would have been down in the frame, and I just turned things and redid the brackets so that I could put it up here. My goal was to make it look like an F-Series Farmall. If you're familiar with the F-Series tractors, the F12s, F14s, they're kind of an unstyled like this. The steering gears are exposed out in the front like that. On the tractor, this would be the gas tank. I don't need a gas tank on this because the gas tank is built into the base of the engine. So I put this here just for looks, and it serves as a toolbox to keep my oil can, my starter, extra spark plugs, etc. This is a little bit of a joke. The F-Series tractors were modeled by horsepower, so F12, F14, F20. This is a 1.5 horse engine, so this is my F1.5.
Cute.
The rear end is out of a SpeedX tractor. So I have forward, reverse, and neutral. There are no other gears. And I've got it geared through belts and pulleys to be at a decent walking speed so that it's safe to go around shows. The back wheels I had made at an Amish place in Dalton, Ohio called Pioneer Ag Equipment. They make wheels any size, any spec you want. They're a manufacturer of horse-drawn farm equipment, and actually quite a large operation. I found out real fast that steel wheels on asphalt are not fun at all.
A little cushion.
So I went down to a place in Worcester that does recaps on semi-tires, and this is actually the tread. It was twice as wide as this. I just cut the center section out of the tread, and I glued it on there with contact cement and put some rivets in it to hold it. and it works really well. And just having that 3/4 inch of rubber makes all the difference in the world for staying on the seat. This is my clutch. It's a hand clutch, which basically is just a belt tensioner. This is the brake, and of course the gears, and then you steer. So when you're in a crowd of people at a show, sometimes somebody will step out in front of you and you get real busy real fast trying to
you don't have
use
four
all four hands. Luckily it doesn't go that fast, and I spend a lot of time riding this and regulating my speed and just watching out for people. The engine, it's a throttle governed engine as opposed to a hit and miss. Hit and miss, the governor controls when it fires to regulate the speed. So it'll sit there and idle and only fire when it needs to. A throttle governed engine fires all the time, more like a modern engine, and the governor controls the throttle to regulate the speed. It's a 100% loss oil system, so you fill this up with oil at the beginning of the day, flip this up, and you can adjust how fast it drips with this. And there's a little sight window right here. You probably can't see it, but the oil will drip there, and you count how many drips usually, and you have to adjust this often because as the engine heats up, the oil will get thinner and stuff. But typically, as long as you see a drip every few seconds going through there, that's enough.
And there's a drip hanging.
Is there?
Yeah. And it goes right down onto the side of the piston or onto the cylinder.
That drops through that tube and it goes all the way down, and it falls right on top of the piston, and then the oil just kind of rolls around the piston, and that's what lubricates it. And in your main bearings, you have grease cups here, and you fill those full of grease, and once in a while when it's running you just give these a little bit of a turn and it forces grease into your main bearings. And then this one is a little different than some because the crank is completely enclosed, so you can't, the open cranks will just have another grease cup on the rod. This one you can't do that, so McCormick Deering came up with this plan. This is actually a grease cup on the end of the crank, and when the engine is running, you've filled this up full of grease ahead of time, and as the engine's running, you reach down, no OSHA back then, you reach down and grab that and stop this, and the flywheel continues to turn, and what it does is it screws that in and forces grease into your crank bearing.
And your main bearings. That's interesting. I never thought about how you would lubricate the connecting rod on the crankshaft in those enclosed engines. Mine, I have two, but they're open. So I don't have that.
So this is
crankshaft grease cup.
Strange. And whatever this oil, when it's done.
Bit here?
This is a fuel pump. The gas tank is in the base of the engine. This is the fuel pump. I haven't run this for a long time, and I just started a little bit ago, so the packings have dried out, so it's dripping. And I actually put this on here because of that, just to keep gas from getting all over the tractor. After it runs for a while, that will actually stop, because there's a packing up in here, and it'll swell up and get worn in again, and it'll stop leaking. This is the governor. There's weights on here. As this is going around, centrifugal force throws these weights out. They're on springs. Throws those weights out, and it slides this collar back and forth, which turns this shaft and opens and closes the throttle. Interesting. So as the engine lugs down, those weights move in, and it just opens the throttle more. It's a pretty simple system. The valve train on it, you've got a push rod here that operates your exhaust valve. The intake valve, unlike a modern engine, is hooked to nothing. It's just floating in there on a spring, and on the intake stroke, the vacuum of the intake stroke actually sucks the valve open and pulls in your gas and air mix, and then on the
compression
stroke, yeah, thank you, compression stroke, it just forces it shut.
Right. That's the same way on the hit and miss. The intake valve is just floating.
Yes. Yeah.
Interesting quick tidbit. That's how the Wright brothers engine worked too. It had floating intake valves. That's how primitive the first heavier than airplane engine was. All right, there's something going on with the belt here. Tell me what I'm looking at.
Okay, again, I said this was an evolution. When I first built it, I wanted it to be a flat belt drive like all the old equipment was. So I actually built it as a flat belt drive. I had another pulley, flat belt pulley. The problem was flat belts, if you've ever seen equipment running with flat belts, it's always a real long belt. Has a lot of sag in it. Flat belts kind of depend on their own weight to grip, to stay tight and to track right. With this short of a distance, I could never get a belt tight enough or to track right. I ran it around actually a couple summers that way, but every time you let the clutch out, that thing would just squeal, or pull a hill, you know, with a couple people sitting on it. That thing would squeal and slip, and I was always having tracking problems. So what I did was got rid of the flat belt. I made up a pulley. There's actually a sprocket down inside of here, and I made this a chain drive, and then I put a flat belt over top of it, which serves two purposes. It acts like a guard to keep the chain oil from being all over you, and it looks like a flat belt.
Yes, it does. Unless you look close, you think it's flat belt drive. Pretty cool. And so you made the frame yourself with plate bar stock, looks like?
Yeah, it was. Most of my projects end up being made out of stuff I have laying around the shop.
That's the best way.
So yeah, it's just bar stock and some little round rod.
And it's a comfortable two-seater by the looks of it.
Yes. Typically, Dad and I ride around the shows, and you kind of I sit off to the side. If you look at the position of the steering wheel, I actually angled it towards me so that I can sit over here and run the clutch, and then he has room to sit here. And a lot of times you'll see me driving around, and I'm usually like this.
All right. Well, how about you fire it up and let's see it and hear it run.
On initial startup, if it's been sitting for a long time, now I had this running a little bit ago, so hopefully it's going to fire right up. There's a little plug right here, and you take that out and pour gasoline in there to fill this bowl up.
Like a primer. So
what that does is it primes your pump. You fill this bowl up, it runs out here, it primes your pump, gets the packings all wet and stuff. So you usually only have to do that once a day. Once it's been up and running, there's gas in here, and it should stay there. Turn my needle valve out one turn, which is way too much to run, but that's what you need to get it started. And then as soon as it's running. And the other thing is you want to make sure you have water in the hopper. I don't have water in the hopper right now.
Right. If you're going to run it a long time, yeah.
If you're going to run it very long, you want to make sure there's water in the hopper. That's the cooling system, and throughout the day when you're running it a long time, you have to add water to it because it evaporates out, it steams. So prime it, make sure you got water, turn on your oiler, and then a lot of guys will start these just by grabbing the flywheel and turning them. I've got stuff in the way and stuff, and I always had difficulty doing that, so I like to use a crank. Cranks can be extremely dangerous if you use them wrong. So far I've been lucky. One of the things I do to make it safer for myself is I'll hold the intake valve open when I crank it, that way it can't fire and backfire. You want to make sure you have your timing. There's a lever here that you can retard the timing to make it safer so that it doesn't fire, because what happens is it'll backfire and it'll throw the crank back at you, and depending on the position that you're in, you're either going to break a wrist or lose some teeth. Nobody wants that to happen.
No.
So I hold that open and I'll get it spinning, get some inertia build up in the flywheels, and then I'll take the crank off and let go of that and let it do its thing. There it is after the initial start. You just got to hurry up because it'll be running really rich. It's running a little too rich now. But I'll turn that needle valve in until it'll stay running. As it warms up, I'm going to adjust this until eventually it'll run real smooth. yet.
Oh, it's got a tight turning radius.
My steering wheel, I didn't put any stop on it, so I can actually turn.
That's cool.
So if I get in a real tight spot, I can twist it on my back wheel sometimes. Slippery. If I was outside, I could get my front wheels are sliding. You get the idea.
All right. Very cool. A labor of love. There, that's sounding better. Warming up. Very nice. Well, thank you for showing us.
You're welcome.
Well, I don't know how many other people out there dream of having something that cool. I know I have. And just getting to see one up close and personal and hear all the details of how it was built was a privilege. So thank you very much for sharing that with us.
Welcome.